Hello, everybody, and welcome. A couple minutes before 6. If I did it right, you went from a PowerPoint to seeing my funny-looking face. This is Wayne Mazzoni, pitching coach at Sacred Heart University, and also founder of D1 Pitching Academy, an in-person and remote pitching development site. I had put in the chat, and only one person saw it, to just introduce yourself. You don't have to. It's not required. If you want to put where you're from, summer team you play, high school, year, what you're hoping to learn from us, feel free to do that. We'll bring on Coach Johnson in a little bit. For the most part, this is the format. It's just going to be he and I with a conversation. I'll ask, obviously, the majority of questions. And then as I get closer to the end, if you have a question that you want to ask, either through the chat or the Q&A box, you're welcome to do that. And hopefully, I'll monitor the questions that are coming from the outside and present those to Coach as well. So we'll start probably in about 1 minute. Looks like Coach was kind enough to actually sign on early, and he's got his video off and his mic off at the moment. But really appreciate you guys being here, him doing this. I know he's got a lot of obligations as a professional pitching coach, and I appreciate that he would take the time to do this here. So again, just last thing, and I'm going to kind of remove myself from the chat so I won't see questions throughout. I will go in there and look at the end. You can ask a question to the chat, which everybody will be able to see. There's also a Q&A question that you can ask, which I will be able to see only. And then says somebody raised their hand. I don't really know what that means when you raise a hand on the thing. So if you're raising your hand, that's 2 over my pay scale on a Zoom thing to know what that exactly means. So if you have a question, I'll look at the chat here for a minute. So we have some guys from Mass Hurricanes, Team Steel, Boys of Summer, TCB baseball. I opened it up to some travel programs to send out to their guys. So we get a good audience for Coach, who he's not going to like that I say this, but he's probably one of the best pitching coaches on this big ball of earth that we have here. So the guy really has a lot of knowledge to pass along to us. So Coach, if you are there on the other side of that screen, feel free to unmute and start your video, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, Wayne, I'm definitely here for whatever reason, trying to start my video, and it says it will not allow me because the host has stopped it.
That should take me 1 second to finish. Fix. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so I'll try that. Try it now, Coach. That should work.
Okay.
Awesome.
Got it.
There you are. Awesome. So first of all, welcome. I appreciate it. I mean, you and I have bumped into each other. We had a conversation. I'm guessing you won't remember. It was by email. Do you know what I'm referring to right off the bat?
Yeah, I think so. I've definitely been around you a little bit.
Yeah, well, in 2012, my Sacred Heart team was in the NC State Regional with you when you were at Vanderbilt and UNC. I think it was Coastal or Wilmington at that point. Anyway, we didn't get to play you. I wrote you after and said, hey, you have any impressions of our team? And you gave me some really, really good feedback just about our club, and it was really, really helpful. So, and then we've kind of gone back and forth a little bit through a third party that we know to try to set up some of these events kind of pre-COVID. But I'm excited to have you here, excited to talk pitching, and again, really appreciate your time. So the audience that is in here is really high school age kids and parents, and then coaches that are dealing with that age. So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here to start with. What was Derek Johnson like as a high school baseball player, athlete, and pitcher?
Yeah, so I'm from Illinois, and I played at a relatively small high school. There were probably less than 1,000 kids in it. So, back then they had, basically it was A and AA. That was the classifications of high school baseball in Illinois. So we were in Class A. So you can imagine it was, like I said, it was pretty small time all the way around. But I had a really good baseball coach. I had a really good coach in high school that I feel, like kind of looking back, was a great mentor for me. I was on the small side. I was probably my freshman year, maybe 5'5" on a good day. I'm left-handed, so that helped a little bit. But it was for me, like, baseball's always been kind of a situation where I had to play with a chip on my shoulder because of my size, and where I came from and how I grew up, and that's really served me well. Past the playing stuff, I would say that it served me well enough as a player. I had a chance to play college baseball. I didn't get a chance to play professional baseball, but like I said, I was kind of a small lefty with a chip on his shoulder that had a pretty good changeup and a pretty bad fastball, but made the most out of everything that I could in terms of what I was doing baseball wise.
So what's interesting, and the reason I really chuckled there was, I think you just described me too. A really good changeup
Right.
and a really not so good fastball.
Right.
And I'm lefty as well. And I see there's definitely a lot of guys that fall into our lefty, pretty average guys that performed in high school and college. As the coach you are now, if you were to go back and instruct that kid in high school, would there be anything in particular you would have changed about the way you went about it, or were you happy with your approach at that point?
Yeah, I wish I would have learned what to work on and how to work on it maybe sooner. I worked hard, I think. Like I say that, I would stack myself up against the other players in my city or in my conference or whatever, and feel like I worked as hard or harder than they did. But it was sort of hit and miss in terms of what I was working on. It was things that my coach told me. It was things that I read. And you have to remember, back then, there's not nearly the kind of information, that there is right now for you guys to look at and hopefully understand the game and how to pitch and all that more so than what you do right now. We didn't have that, right? Like there wasn't really any of that out there.
Right.
I went to summer camps to try to better myself, and the same sort of thing. Like most of the information that we got back then was really subjective. So it was, something that was passed down from coach to coach or player to player. And there wasn't a whole lot of objective information that you could get your hands on in order to become a better player. So a lot of like trial and error. And a lot of times those trial and errors, instead of it taking 2 or 3 times to figure it out, it's taken you an entire summer. It's taken you an entire year.
Right.
And so I probably just, I got better in time, but I wish there would have been a way for me to maybe get better a little bit faster and, kind of move on to that next piece.
And was there a time during, let's say, high school or college where you foresaw that you would coach, or did you get out of college and go, let's see, what am I going to do now? How did you transition from player to coach?
Yeah, well, I got really lucky. My senior year, or after my senior year, there was an outside chance that I was going to be drafted. It would have been late. And I had some scouts telling me that they thought that might happen. It didn't. And, and so for about, I don't know, a month or a month and a half, I was crushed, trying to figure out, because I wanted to play pro ball. I'd set up my whole life around trying to figure out how to do that. So when it didn't happen, I went to a couple of tryouts. They had tryouts back then, which was a nightmare, especially for a small lefty who didn't throw hard.
Had to wait around forever, probably.
Yeah, you're waiting around, you get 10 pitches and they look at you and you don't throw hard. So like, that's it. So you did that. And once you realized that it wasn't going to happen, they didn't really have independent leagues back then either. So there wasn't any like, hey, maybe I'll go to an indie league and play for a year or two. So I got really lucky from a standpoint that my alma mater, Eastern Illinois University, it's a small Division I school. The head coach at the time, his name was Dan Callahan, and Cal didn't really have a whole lot of help. He asked me, I had a little bit of school to finish up, asked me if I might want to join, him as a pitching guy. And so I did, because I figured if I couldn't play, then I definitely was going to coach. I went to school for that too. I was in education. and figured that, once my playing career was over, whenever that was going to be, that, that I'd coach it up and see what happened. So I got to coach literally the very same year after I was done playing. And really, since then, I've never had a summer or a winter, or really for that matter, any part of the year off from being a coach. So this is, I think it's year 26 or 27.
Wow. And I think back to my time in the beginning, because I followed some of that same trajectory. And I remember the coach that I was when I first started out, and the things I was teaching, which are only things that I was taught, and how much I've changed over the time. Is there anything you look back in the early part of your coaching career and said, oh my God, I was doing that, or I didn't really know what I was doing? Because when you start coaching, there's no really on-ramping. You don't go to school for a year, you just start up and running. So do you think back to that time and oh my God, I can't believe I was doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it best. I think, when you start coaching, the first place that you start is what you were taught. It's really the only place you can start. So whatever it was that I had learned up to that point, that's essentially what I was teaching as a coach. And you find out really quick, or the longer that you do it, that most people aren't like you. I was coaching 6'3", 210-pound right-handers with a good arm. Obviously their journey's a little bit different than mine, and
right.
And they work differently, they move differently than I do. You have all different levels of abilities and skills, so you find out really quick, no matter what it was that you thought, it can be a starting point for you as a coach. But certainly you have to be able to branch out, and you have to understand how people move, and how different people move differently, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And be able to, try to coach accordingly.
And obviously in your coaching career through college at various, schools, I mean, I know you're at Stetson, obviously at Vanderbilt, and then you moved into the pro level. Did you change as a coach based on the population of people that you're coaching? Were you a different coach with Vanderbilt as a different level of recruit you're getting and different in the minors, or have you generally kept your same approach in terms of the way you're coaching?
Yeah, I think baseball is baseball. It's relative to the level that you're at, but I think really you're coaching again sort of to what you know, and you're trying to frame that inside of the people that you're working with. So I would say that I was different at every stop along the way, but I think hopefully that was hopefully because of the fact that I was getting better as a coach. I was learning more. I was understanding, things that maybe a year or two before I didn't quite understand, or I thought of them differently. And, so if nothing else, alongside the idea of getting players better, it was really important that I tried to get myself better too, and learn as many intricacies and as many parts of this thing that I could, in order to serve my players. And essentially that's what, at the end of the day, what a coach does is he's serving the guys that are around him, that are under his care.
Now, in terms of, which obviously you haven't done since you've been at the pro level, you probably don't miss this part of the college level, but just since our audience, recruiting's a huge thing. Obviously we're dealing with COVID, and a lot of recruiting has changed with the dead period. I'm assuming, besides being an accomplished coach, you were at a lot of stops of the way. You were doing a heavy amount of recruiting, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what were things that as a recruiter what were some of the things you were looking for to go further with a pitcher? Obviously velo plays a big part, but what were the things that would catch the eye of you in the recruiting process?
Yeah. So, I tried to get there early, to any place, any event that I was going to. And, I did want to see sort of how this guy operated, so the guy that I was interested in, I wanted to see how he operated. I wanted to see what it was like for him to get on the field, how he interacted with the other players, sort of how he carried himself. And you're making snap judgments there. I mean, obviously sometimes you're probably wrong too, but you're sort of looking for, hey, what's this guy going to be like when he gets up to our campus? What's it, what's it going to feel like when he's at Vanderbilt or Stetson or wherever? But I just sort of wanted to get a load of his act as much as anything, like what his act was like, how he prepared, how he played catch, what his preparation was like before he went out and pitched or played. And, the more that you sit there and observe, and the more that you stack that up against all the other guys that you've done the same thing with, right? Like that you've watched, in that setting too, you start to get a pretty good idea of what you think works, what you think is going to work at your school, what you might have to do with that young man as a freshman. But I can promise you that the guys who came in that were ready, that were engaged, who took their preparation seriously, those guys were really easy to recruit.
Right.
They really are. It was sort of the guy who was talented, but he didn't really know what he was doing, or just whatever. I mean, and there's some really good players. There were some really good players that we had at Vanderbilt. I can name one or two right off the top of my head that, when I watched them prepare, it was sort of knowing kind of up front, hey, like this guy is really good, but he doesn't exactly know what he's doing. And that, like David Price, who's pitched in the big leagues for a while, and Sonny Gray, who fortunately I get to be around, or continue to be around with being a Cincinnati Red. Like both of those guys were really talented. Both of them really didn't know, how to prepare. And it was pretty obvious. They were just really talented. And really good guys and good teammates and all of that. But at the same time, like guys that I knew once they got to Vanderbilt, we would have to help them understand how to prepare and how to work. So, just looking for little things. And I think that's, so much of what a coach does is he's always looking for those little things that might matter. I talk to our guys a lot with the Reds about, searching for the 1%. And 1%, I know some of you guys may have heard that. For me, that's just that idea of like any little thing that we can do to gain an edge, any little thing that I can do, whether that's in the weight room or whether that's mentally or whether that's in my preparation or whether that's in my routine or whatever you want to call it. If I can make that 1% better, and I can do that in a lot of different areas all through the course of the year, it turns out I'm going to be a pretty good player at the end of that year. I'm definitely going to better myself, put it that way. So I think that's a really important thing to look for as you're recruiting these guys. Do you think they're willing to search for that 1%?
I love that. That's really good. When just back to sort of the preparation too, at any level that you've been at, are you setting everyone's routine? Are you outlaying that structure and expect everyone to follow it, or do guys have leeway in maybe the day that they want to lift or the arm care program that they want to do, whether they want to do bands or what kind of long toss? How do you go about saying this is the things that must happen and here's where you can pick and choose what you like?
Yeah, so in the big leagues, quite honestly, most of those guys already have sort of the way that they're going to approach it. My job in that aspect is to maybe help them see where we can make some adjustments, where maybe we could put something else in or take something out that might help them just perform a little bit better. But for the most part, the framework for them, it's already set. Like they're grown men, they already kind of have what got them there in the first place.
Right.
I think my job is mostly then just to take a look at whatever that is and ensure that it's good. And, if somehow we can make it better, we will. It's highly individualized there too. Like guys are really high strung in the way that they approach the game. Most of them kind of have their certain kind of set of here's what I'm going to do in the weight room. This is how I've done it in the past. This is what I'm doing in the training room prior to, this is how I play catch. This is how I throw a bullpen. And really it's kind of poking the bear every once in a while to see if maybe you can make some changes that will help them perform better. I think as you go down in levels, whether that's, going from the big leagues down into the minor leagues, certainly a guy in AAA is going to look a little bit different than what a guy in Able is going to look like, especially a guy who's just getting out of high school or maybe out of college or even for that matter, from a foreign country like the Dominican or Venezuela.
Right.
So you got a lot of different sort of, I guess, angles that you have to cover from that standpoint. As a college coach, I would set sort of how we were going to do things and then really try to individualize it as best as I possibly could to help, the individual succeed. And really that's what it's all about. I mean, I think there has to be a framework, but inside of the framework, then it's understanding like what needs each player has. So in the end, you might have the framework for the things that you're going to do, but it's going to look a little bit differently based on every single guy and the needs that he has in order to be successful or hopefully, make it to another level of baseball.
And in your job as a big league pitching coach, what sort of maybe a tough question, what falls under things that you're doing? Is it video analysis? Is it working with tech? Is it the mental part? Is it approach pitch development? What would you say over the course of maybe even this time of year, but even spring training, what falls under what you are doing most of the time?
Yeah, during the year, I can say that for the most part, it's our game planning. It's planning against our opposition. And we have a lot of information that we have in order to do that. And then from an individual perspective, it's, kind of going guy by guy. This time of year, we spend a lot of time doing what we call homework, for lack of a better way of saying it. It's sort of taking a deep dive look at what guys have done in the last couple of years, and understanding what they're doing from a pitching standpoint, understanding if there's something else that we could be doing. And generally based from that, it's pulling one or two things, like whether that's something about their delivery or it's something about the way they pitch, maybe the amount that they throw a certain pitch, or, a plan against a righty or a plan against a lefty. And generally speaking, we're taking all of that information and try to boil it down into one or two things that we're going to work on in spring training. And then, from there, once we hit that mark, then we're going on to, okay, what can we do during the season? And you got to remember, we're trying to perform here. So we know that performance is the number one thing. We're not going to be making a ton of changes, especially physical changes during the year. But at the same time, if there's something we can help this guy get to, we want to do that. But like I said, from spring training into the season, most of my job is it's game planning for the game that night, and then it's taking the individual pieces that we're working on with each guy and just trying to help him realize that the best that we can.
Okay, so along that note, clearly at the pro level, and I'm assuming the minors, catchers and pitchers are calling their own game after being game planned with a coach like yourself, right?
Yep.
Okay, back to college at Vandy, wherever you were, did you call all the pitches all the time for everyone?
No.
No. Okay.
There was a period of time where I did. There was also an equal period of time where like once guys got a little bit older, I was giving them the keys to do that. And, it's a little bit harder because it's more time that you have to spend, especially off the field, maybe in a classroom setting or
right.
whatever. But I think it's important because I think, what I have seen in my few years as a pro guy, generally speaking, catchers aren't very well equipped to call a game, and either are pitchers. So you are spending a lot of time one way or the other if they're good enough to play professional baseball and helping them understand how to do that. And it takes a little while. I think it's why you see a lot of catchers. You don't see a lot of young catchers in the major leagues. You don't see a lot of 23 and 24-year-old catchers.
Yep.
And part of that is that they're not equipped quite yet to call their own game, to be able to handle 13 guys and 13 different guys and, all the situations that the game will call for. A lot of times offensively, they're ready to go, but
Right.
defensively, they still have a ways to go. And a lot of times you'll see that those catchers, a lot of those guys end up being 25, 26, even beyond, until they get their shot in the big leagues. Pitchers, on the other hand, it's really just trying to help them understand their strengths, first and foremost, and then understanding kind of how to stay away from certain things or how to pitch around certain things. But at the same time, I mean, they still, it still takes them a while to get it going too, and understanding how to sequence pitches together.
And if you could snap your fingers and blanket high school and travel baseball, would you have all the pitchers and catchers call their own game? Do you think that's the best way to develop?
Yeah, I mean, I get both sides of it. I really do. I think, on the one hand, you want to win and you want to, as much as possible, and maybe the coaches feel that they can do that better. And that, hey man, I get that. Like, when you're playing the game, I don't know anyone who just says, hey, it's okay if we lose. Like, I don't know anyone that thinks that. So I get the idea of really wanting to win and being as competitive as possible. And, that's what you play the game for. So I do get the idea of, maybe it's easier for some coaches to call their own games and call the pitches for the players. But I think there's got to be some sort of teaching that goes on alongside of it. So, even if you are calling all the pitches, I do think that there has to be something that says, hey, we're going to sit down, and even though I'm calling the pitches, I still want to teach our guys how to pitch. And I still want to teach our catchers how to call a game and how to understand the nuances between the different pitchers that they're catching and the different nuances of the game. And I think if you can do that, then you're probably getting the best of both worlds. Right. On the flip side of it, having everyone call their own game, again, there comes teaching with that. There comes, time spent having to get these guys to understand. Because, the one thing that we have to look at is we're not talking about something that's only happening once they get to high school. I mean, these kids are, and they're 8 and 9 years old, and their coaches are calling their pitches for them. So, right. It's definitely something that's starting really, really young. So I would just say, in order to combat that, it's like, hey, if nothing else, let's make sure that we're teaching them on the side of that, to where that they can learn how to call their own game. They can learn how to pitch when the time comes.
Okay, so let's kind of switch gears a little bit, get more specific on actually developing on the mound. Let's talk a little delivery. Again, targeting towards the audience. You're the sophomore, junior. What are the things that you'd like to see in the delivery, that are some keys in the delivery for someone that is developing at that age, in terms of whether it's arm health, velocity, ability to command? What does Derek Johnson look for really keys within the pitching delivery?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep this one brief, because literally we could spend 4 hours talking about this, right? Like, the delivery and stuff like that is, it's obviously there's a lot that goes into it, and it's very complex. But I think the one thing that we can kind of go back to, and we can agree on at least fundamentally, would be that rhythm and tempo of your delivery, it sort of sets the stage for everything that's going to happen, right? So let's talk about rhythm first. Rhythm is that, it's that flow state that happens inside of almost anything that you do when you move. So if I'm shooting a dart at a dartboard, I'm not going to cock back my hand and then go halfway here and then throw the dart, right? You're not going to do that. You're basically going to look at the dartboard, you're going to draw your hand back, and you're going to flip the dart. You're doing the same thing if you're shooting a basketball. I dribble 3 times, I look at the rim, I dribble 2 more times, I come up, and I shoot all in one motion. Pitching is the exact same thing, right? So once we start our delivery, we want it to basically go and not stop or there not be gaps in it. We want it to, once it starts to flow, and it flows from one movement to the other. So, my hands and my knees go together. I break my hands, I unravel my arm, I throw the ball, and I finish. And you can see where some guys are a little bit more herky jerky. Some guys will stop their arm back here and then have to restart it and throw. So for the most part, if you think about it from a standpoint of once I start my motion, I start the rocker step back, or I start my leg lift and my hands go with it. Once I start that point of my delivery, I basically don't want there to be any stops, pauses, or gaps in it, right? So it's one thing happening after another. I break my hands. Once I break my hands, my arm comes through, I throw the ball, I finish. There isn't any sort of herky-jerky stop, go. Everything has that sort of fluid motion. And then when you add tempo to it, tempo is the speed, right? So we have to get to a point to where we're going our fastest probably once our front foot lands and we start to rotate to turn to throw the ball, right? And we want to build that tempo as we go. It may start off pretty slow, but we're going to get faster and faster and faster and faster until we're at our fastest point as we're throwing the ball. And what you're going to find is that tempo, sometimes it goes a little bit too fast too soon, or too fast in areas that, maybe it produces sort of a herky-jerky movement. And once we do that and we see that, like, it's pretty easy to see when a young man's doing that, then we know that he's out of time. We know that there's a movement out of sequence. We know that there's probably some forces that are going one way and maybe forces going the other way. We want forces to combine and go together, right? So, that rhythm, we start, we keep everything moving towards the target that we're going to throw to, and then we build how fast we're going as we're doing that. That's a pretty good key and a pretty good indicator of, do I have a good delivery or not? And, it might sound overly simple. It's not. But it is probably like the two parts of a delivery that you can't go wrong in understanding. So what does it look like when it's not going, when it's not going the right way? I think the easiest way to tell, like, rhythm and tempo, we talked about those pauses, those stabs or those stops somewhere in the delivery where we have to restart and go again. I know that if I see that, that's a problem. I know that if I go too fast, I'm going to look uncoordinated, or I'm going to be out of control. And as soon as I'm uncoordinated or out of control, bad things are going to happen, right? So, I think there's a lot of stuff that's out there that says, hey, your arm needs to be here and your leg needs to be here and this, that, and the other. And those are all fine. But I think just looking at it from sort of a big perspective is, do you have rhythm? And do you have the correct tempo to where your body is on time? Because at the end of the day, and this is all we ever really need to know, at the end of the day, the ball never lies. So wherever you threw the ball, wherever you were trying to throw the ball, right? If it went there, then chances are you were on really good time with your body and your arm to make the ball do what you wanted it to do. And if the ball didn't go where you wanted it to go, then chances are you weren't on time with that. And so the easy way of saying it, like, and I'll turn around, hopefully you guys can see this, where do I miss most? Do I miss arm side and up, or do I miss that down and away fastball? Do I kind of pull it and yank it? Both of those are suggesting that you're not on time. Both of those are suggesting that somewhere, some way, you're a little early, you're a little late. Your body had to compensate to get the ball to go one way or the other. So the guy who's oftentimes up and in to a righty, arm side high miss, that guy's really early with his throw, right? So he's releasing the ball really early. And that means that maybe it's because he's late, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But he's releasing the ball early. Instead of releasing the ball out in front of him, he's releasing it back here somewhere. But as long as we realize that the ball never lies, then we have a pretty good chance at correcting our delivery. It's almost like reverse engineering, right? So we know where we wanted the ball to go, and the ball went, one or the other places. we know that we weren't quite on time with that arm, body, and hand. And so it's an easy way to fix it as we're making adjustments as we're throwing the ball. Okay, so
I'm starting to lose you a little here, so I may switch to my phone, Coach, just to make sure.
okay.
Yeah, so hang on. I'm going to see if I can outsmart my technology. And
well, it looks like I'm in pretty good shape in terms of Wi-Fi and that sort of thing. So,
all right.
Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Okay, so maybe it's just on my side. They said they're hearing you fine, so I'll just keep on
Okay.
going. If anyone in the text area, if anyone in the chat gets an issue, then I'll change. So one of the things I say, and I totally agree with everything you said, is I find a lot of kids are they're thinking too mechanical. They view their pitching delivery as 14 things somebody told them they have to do, instead of one fluid flowing movement delivery that feels athletic, that you can repeat, that keeps you aggressive with good intent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think, like, I'll give you my take. When I hear the word mechanics, it sort of drives me nuts. Mechanics fix cars.
Right.
To me, when we're talking about the way that you throw a ball, you're talking about your delivery. And of course, yes, there are mechanics. I get that. But really, like, if you think of it mechanically, just like you said, hey, I've got 12 or 13 points that I've got to get through. I think that's when you're going to see all those like really rigid, sort of choppy looks when you're throwing the ball. The question I have is, when you play catch, do you think that way, or do you just play catch? And, for the majority of you,
great point.
For the majority of you, you'll say when you play catch, you just play catch. Okay, so then take that another step or add another layer to it. When I'm playing catch, then what's it look like when I play catch, but I lift my leg? What's it look like when I lift my leg and turn my body? What's it look like when I do that on a mound with a slope? They essentially should all look the same, because the fundamental root of what you're doing is throwing the ball, right? Like, that's it. And when you start thinking about where your arm is, or where your leg is, or where your foot is, I think you get into real trouble in terms of you're sort of missing the point of what you're trying to do, which is, I'm trying to throw a ball really hard to a certain spot. And, like, if you sort of keep it that simple and you understand that, there's just another layer of what you're doing. It's why like you see all the time, your shortstop's maybe your best athlete on the team, right? Your shortstop, he plays shortstop every day. He doesn't really pitch a whole lot, but hey, at the end of the game, he's got to come and pitch. Hey, coach, I've never pitched before. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Just do what you do, as a shortstop. So essentially that's what the shortstop does, right? He doesn't really think about any of his mechanics or any of that. He just sort of lifts his legs and throws the ball the way he does when he plays shortstop. And 9 times out of 10, you see that guy pitch, you're like, he can pitch. He's okay.
Right.
He's actually pretty good. And I think when we start kind of overemphasizing the pieces of the delivery and overemphasizing the, every movement as an independent feature of the delivery, that's when we get ourselves in trouble.
Right.
All I know is that one movement goes into the next movement, that goes into the next movement, that goes into the next. One of the best ways I've ever heard pitching described was, it's a player that's going down a mound on a flatbed truck. He's got a merry-go-round, and he's got a Ferris wheel. Right now, hopefully this isn't gonna, it's not gonna compound what we're just talking about. but like, if you think about it, that's exactly right. Like, you're going in a straight line, that's the flatbed truck. You're rotating, that's that merry-go-round. The Ferris wheel is the finish and down through the ball. Like, it's really can be as simple as that, right? Like, I'm trying to go in a straight line. I don't want to, if I'm going to pitch to you, I don't want to go over here or over here. I want to go directly to you. And so that's your flatbed truck going down the mountain, right? Then that merry-go-round is I want to rotate from my backside to my front side. The Ferris wheel is just sort of that finish kind of at the end, trying to get through the ball.
Right.
And I think if you keep it simple and you keep it to where it's simple to understand that it is about throwing before it's about pitching, then that's
Yes.
when guys end up being really good and really natural at what they're doing.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think we've seen that the best guys are the simplest, smoothest. There's a lot that can go wrong when you're pitching a baseball. It's like a golfer, the guy on tour who crushes it 300. It's pretty simple, but the guy hacking it up on the course, there's a lot of things that can go wrong on that swing.
Right.
And I'd say something that I hope will help people, but maybe you'll see if you'll kind of stamp your approval on it, or tell me maybe it's something else different. But I always think there's 3 ways to focus on pitching. One point, I'm working on something and I'm actually focusing on my body. So that might be towel work if done right, dry work, or I say thrown into a net, where the focus is not the ball. It's, am I moving efficiently, athletically, properly? I can focus on my body. In a bullpen, I'm trying to become basically able to make the ball do what I want it to do on a regular basis. That's what a bullpen is for. Can I throw my 0-0 breaking ball for a strike? Can I throw my 1-2 breaking ball down and away? And then in a game, it's about beating the dude at the plate with a bat and just winning the competition. And I find that a lot of guys cross that over. They're on the mound in a game thinking mechanics, thinking delivery, and not simplifying it to just, I've worked hard, I'm on the mound, I got the ball, I'm on offense, and you picked a bad day to hit. They don't have the right approach. I don't know if it's you see that at the level. What's your thoughts on that take of working on your
pitching? I see it every day. I promise you it's just as prevalent in the big leagues as it is, maybe with some of the younger guys. It's maybe in a little bit of a different aspect or a different way that it's the same, but it's the same. So actually, I don't know if you'd want to use this, but I've had pretty good luck with it, and I think it makes some sense. We talk about being over the rubber or over the plate. So every day that we go into the bullpen, are we over the rubber or over the plate? And if they're over the rubber, that just means that they're working on something. They're working on the feel of a pitch or some specific part of their delivery, or the feel of a breaking ball, or however, you need to look at. And in those cases, I don't really care if they throw strikes or not. Matter of fact, they don't even need a catcher.
Right.
We can do that just as easily with the net as we could with the catcher sitting there. If they're over the plate, that means that, they're getting away from the idea of having to work on something, and now they're more in compete mode where, I'm trying to put 2 or 3 pitches together in order to sequence them properly. So I'm going up and into, down and away. I'm using my breaking ball as a strike pitch and as a finish pitch or whatever. But I think it's an easy way for them to distinguish, what's my goal in this particular bullpen. I love the way you said it. Like, yep. You got 3 kind of layers of it to where it's like, hey, I'm working on something. I can do that in a net. I'm working on pitching, and then I'm working on competing when I'm in the game. And it's a good way to differentiate it. It's just another way of saying it, over the rubber, over the plate. Because the one expectation that we have to have at our level is that when we are out in competing in a game, that we aren't thinking, too much about what, my hand's doing or whatever.
Yeah. And
it's getting harder. It's getting harder to do.
It is.
And this is something that you guys have to understand. Like, it's not your fault, but with all of the technology available and all the stuff that you guys have at your disposal, it's really easy to get caught up in all of that. And you should, because it can help you become better. On the other side of that, though, like you have to be able to distinguish times when you're working on something to get to another level of play. That breaking ball is an example. I've got the Rapsodo and I've got the high-speed camera and I can see all the stuff. That's great. I mean, there's a time for that for sure. And then there's also a time when you have to feel it, now. And so instead of having to see it, now I have to feel it. And then there comes a time when you have to do it, which means that you have to execute it inside of a game. And, so there's nothing wrong with the stuff that we're using. We just have to be able to put it in its place. And we have to be able to use it in a smart way, as opposed to a way to where it pulls us away from doing what we really want to do, which is win, right? Like, what's the goal here, fellas? What's the goal? Well, it should always be winning. I mean, I don't know why you'd play if you weren't trying to win. So, like we have to put it in its place. There's a use for it. It's a good use. It'll help you get better faster. But there's also a time when it's like, okay, well, I've done my work. I've prepared. Now I got to trust it. And trusting it means I'm going to go out and, if Coach Mazzoni is standing at the plate, then I'm going to get him out, because that's what I have to do. That's my only job, is to get Coach Mazzoni out. Doesn't matter about how good my curveball is that day. It only matters if I can get Coach Mazzoni out.
Yeah, no, I love that. And one thing I was going to say is this explains why I have the gray and the beard, is I coached Matt Blake at Holy Cross before Sacred Heart. Matt Blake, now the Yankees pitching coach, and he had something that I love, is he designates one bullpen as sort of game mode. Like, this is when you're in this bullpen, our home pen, you are working on competing and your repertoire of pitches. When you're in the visitor pen, that's the construction zone. That's the time we can get under the hood on our delivery. But today you're going to come out and tell me which way you're going and what the focus is, which is kind of what you say, over the rubber, over the plate. So I'm going to steal that one from you. I love it, because that's simple in that regard. All right. So two other key things here, and then we can get some questions or anything else you want to impart to people. The whole world obviously wants to throw hard and throw harder. I'm sure you could ask even, your best guys that are throwing 96, 90. I mean, I have a guy that pitched for us. We use them a variety of ways at Sacred Heart. Now he's with the Tigers in the minor leagues, Jason Foley. He's at 100, 101 on a regular basis. Yeah. So, and I bet you if I asked him, Foles, would you like 3 miles an hour? He's going to say yes. Right. So the weighted balls, the plyos, the drive lines, the long toss. I mean, if you had a son that's in 11th grade, he's throwing 83, but he wants to throw 86, what are you telling him, Coach?
Yeah, so a little bit of a loaded question, because but I know what you're saying, and I'll answer it great, or I'll try to answer it great. I'm for all of the modalities. So I've been using weighted balls really since probably probably close to 15, 18 years now. And, I believed in them early on. I implemented them early on, and they worked. My guys at Vanderbilt gained miles an hour. They got faster. They got stronger. They did all of those things. And, I also think that there's a risk to them as well. And, I don't think we can look at it and say, well, there is no risk to it, because I think that there definitely is. But the risk is sort of, in my mind, it stems from the idea of not having a good plan to begin with. It stems from not progressing slowly but surely. And I think that's where a lot of this stuff goes off the rails, right? Like, so a couple of things, is your body ready to accept the forces that something heavier and something lighter is going to put on you? And the answer to that is, well, if I'm still growing and if I still have, I'm still not real strong, then I may want to stay away from that, at least right now. There's a building block that happens before that I can work on, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I think if you're just looking at it as a standalone, like, it can help, but it's got to be done right. It's got to be done in proper timing. It's got to be done in a proper progression, and then it also can't be just a standalone saying, oh well, if I fling weighted balls around, then I'm automatically going to start throwing harder.
Right.
Because it just really, it doesn't work that way. Your body doesn't work that way. So, let's say that you're one of those young men that you haven't grown quite yet, that you're still filling out, that you're still, you don't have your big boy muscles quite yet. And that's going to be a little bit all over the map in terms of age groups, right? Like some guys are 14, they got it already, man. They look like Coach Mazzoni, right? The full beard
Yeah,
and all of that. So and then other guys, they look like they're still 10. But I think the one place that you can't go wrong is becoming an expert thrower, right? Like, so before you decide to pitch, we talked about that earlier, right? We talked
yeah,
about like the idea that pitching is just sort of throwing with a little bit of style added to it.
yeah.
And so, the more that I learn how to throw properly, the more that I place emphasis on the way that I throw, the intent or the effort that I put inside of that throwing, the more that I monitor my volume, my workload, how much I am throwing, how often I'm doing it, then all of those things, kind of start to play into the idea that you become a better thrower. Now, all of a sudden, the better a thrower I become, the harder I start to throw the ball. Now I start growing, I start filling in. I can add some of the modalities with it, and it complements. And I'm throwing harder and harder. I think where guys go wrong is that they have poor planning. They don't periodize. They don't really think about their volume. They don't think about maybe the timing of the year of when it's really smart to, hey, like this is the part of the year where I'm getting after it. This is a part of the year where maybe I'm in the weight room a little bit more. I'm training some other things.
Right.
So I think if you can develop a smart plan, the good part is that there's information out there on all of this stuff, and it is all over the place, which could be a problem in and of itself.
Right.
But the fact is there is a lot of information, and if you do your homework, and you are particular and meticulous about the way that you approach it, then I think good things can happen. The last thing I'll say about it is this. Throwing a baseball is a risk reward proposition, right? Like there isn't any one of us, there's no one on the planet that throws so well and so efficiently that he has no chance of ever getting hurt. It's just the way it is with playing sports. You can get hurt in any sport that you play, and pitching is no different. But it's also like, I think sometimes guys get hurt just because they don't think through how they're planning, the way that they're throwing the ball or the way that they're competing or the amount that they're competing.
Yeah, no question. And, for those that are obviously watching here, Coach Johnson has a tremendous book on pitching, which covers so many things. And I remember reading your book many years back, which I followed many of the things in the program. But one of the things that was really, I don't think you said it, but I did read it in your book, was that, what is a baseball? A baseball is a weighted ball. That's someone arbitrarily made 5 ounces. And I think it's fair to say 5 ounces is probably not the ideal weight because it does lead to pain when you throw it a lot. Whereas an NFL quarterback or any quarterback throwing a 14-ounce football could throw 150 times a day in practice or a game and doesn't get shoulder or elbow problems. So,
Right.
I'm with you on the weight of balls, and it's great that you were one of the guys before it sort of, everyone has it now. I get a little concerned, especially for the kids that you mentioned, some of the younger kids, when anything gets too light. I get concerned with the 2-ounce ball, or I say, do you echo that thought with the light ball if not, person's not ready for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lighter stuff, and it may not be completely scientific in the way that I say this, but, it's likely that your arm is moving a little bit faster with the lighter implement, and that can be a good thing. That's why you're training that sort of that overload underload type of feel to it, and that's all good. But at the same time, like, have you ever thrown a tennis ball really hard and you have sort of that ringing feel in your arm after you throw it? Like there is something going on in there, and I think you have to be really careful with that. I think the heavier that it is, the more that your body sort of tries to set itself up for that. So, the heavier your implement, talk about the football as the example, your body will move a little bit slower. It will protect itself a little bit more as it's throwing. And so, the lighter one, it's probably where things can go a little bit haywire. You are going faster. You're probably not quite as good a control. And it's probably where some injury can occur, especially if you're a poor thrower. And there is some of that movement out of sequence, that early launch that we talked about earlier. You're asking for some forces to be placed on your arm that you really don't want to have. So, again, it's all relative, but I think as long as there's a good plan there, as long as it's the right timing, where guys can handle the load of that, then it's a good thing. But just like anything else, too much of a good thing it ends up being a bad thing. So throwing a baseball is still the best way to learn how to throw a baseball.
Okay, I like that. All right. Sort of on the flip side of again, you and I could talk, or anyone that talks pitching could go hours and hours to talk pitching, but to switch gears on that, I hear this quote, daily. I hear it all the time. I'm working on my changeup. I ask a kid, right? Hey, what do you throw? I throw a 2-seam, 4-seam. I got this, that. I'm working on my change. The whole world is working on a changeup, and a very small percentage of people actually have a changeup that they'll use in crunch time. And to those listening, I had a kid, James Taubel, who is a lefty like us, shorter than us, not a prospect, threw 84, 85, but a curveball, slider, changeup that he would throw at any time, any pitch at any time, didn't matter, 2-0, 1-0, 3-1, he could care less. 6-inning shutout at LSU. Meanwhile, everyone's laughing at the scoreboard when they're used to seeing 95. But when it's 1-0 and 2-0 and you don't know what's coming, or a changeup is coming, you actually really start to become an elite pitcher, right? So any, whether it's thoughts, training, grips, any couple of things on a changeup that you would impart to people that are, again, working on their changeup but really don't have a changeup?
Yeah, so the first place that I would tell you is that, to me, like, when you ask someone who's working on their changeup, 9 times out of 10, they're showing you some semblance of a circle change, right? And I don't know, when you look at this grip, the way that I have it held in my hand, whether I'm holding it well or not, that's a pretty extreme way of holding your hand. Are you holding your hand in this manner in any other way of any other thing that you do? And the answer to that is no. You just don't. So, like to me, if this was karate, this would be like the master kung fu grip of all pitches, right? Like, so yeah, maybe the guys who are really good can throw it like this. The guys who probably aren't as good, we probably need to start somewhere a little bit more simple. So let's go back to that. 4-seam grip, a 2-seam grip, and we can start to split this down into a lot of different layers as well. First off, my middle finger and my thumb need to be in the middle of the ball as much as possible. We want to be able to impart as much force behind the ball as we can. Our middle finger and our thumb is going to help us do that because it's going to be in the middle of the ball. So, you look at the way guys grip their 4-seam, you see a lot of differences. You'll see some guys who are grabbing what I call the smooth part. That doesn't make sense to me because you're trying to rip your fingertips off the seam. Spacing is going to be different. Some guys are together. Some guys are a little bit further apart. I'm going to say, as a starting point, something about pinky widths distance apart is probably a decent place to start, with my thumb and my middle finger in the middle of the ball, right? So that's your fastball. And this is a pitch that for all, intensive purposes, this is the pitch that you're going to throw the most, and it's probably the one that you have the best command with, right? So instead of thinking of all this like crazy stuff, why don't we just take a fastball and turn it into a changeup, right? So now it's a 3-finger grip, my middle finger and my thumb still in the middle of the ball, right? I can take these 2 fingers, my first finger and my ring finger, and I can put them close together. I can spread them apart. I can spread them apart even a little bit further. And I can just sort of play with the idea of, hey, this is still very, very much like my fastball, right? So this was my fastball. here's my change up. And then I evolved from there, right? So I went from that 3-finger, I spread my fingers out a little bit more. I start to draw my thumb up to the side. I might even start to close off. I might go another direction. I take these 2 fingers and I put them close together. I spread the others out, and now I have a different type of change up. But instead of starting at the hardest point, let's start at the one that I know. Like, I know that you guys know this pitch. I know that you know it. Or I know that you know this pitch, right? The 2-seamer. And I'm just going to take what you know, and I'm going to turn it into something a little bit different. And I think when we do that, like, you get to those pitches better. You get to those pitches easier, because then it becomes something like, hey, I put a little bit of pressure on my first finger, and that's a really big deal for me. Whereas another guy says, hey, if I tuck my thumb all the way underneath, that makes it do what I want it to do. And it becomes very individualized for the guy that's throwing it. This one, to me, is the one that we want to probably get to last, instead of first.
I've thought those things. I love talking to you because you take it and you put it in a way that I can get it out. It makes sense. You're right. The kid is working on it because he's trying to master something that is incredibly hard to do. Plus, they've always been, snapping the wrist on the fastball and the breaking ball, and then they try to go here and pronate, and then they have no confidence in it. And who wants to keep practicing something that they're terrible at? And then they really don't develop that change up. And you're right. It's just a matter of a little more friction and weakening the grip a little bit and feeling it out and growing from there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had good luck with that in the past, and ironically, you can say, well, that's great for a 15-year-old. I use it with our big league guys all the time. Especially guys who are working on a change up and they don't have a very good one. It's a great place to start, because I do know the one thing, for sure, is I know they know their fastball. I know that. And so if I know that they know their fastball, then how can we get something that will offset that, take a little bit of speed off, and you're also thinking about, placement in hand. Is it deeper? Is it more fingertip oriented, and those fingertips are being spread out? Every guy is going to be a little bit different, based on hand size, based on how they feel the ball. But it's a great place to start, because this one, whatever they do with this, chances are, like, you can get them to figure something out on the changeup side with that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. All right, so last question for me, and then we'll see if the group has some questions, which is something I struggle with, not struggle, but just to try to, in some small way, pass it on, is this back of I'm sure you're younger than me, but you grew up probably teaching yourself a lot, figuring stuff out yourself. Every time you played baseball as a kid growing up, it wasn't maybe at a formal practice or with a formal coach. Maybe you had some of that, but it seemed to have switched now, where like a kid can't do anything unless it's a formal practice or a formal coach. And so how do you, whether it's with technology or the way they're being coached, what's your advice to blend a little old school, figure it out myself, forget the Rapsodo or this, and I'll just figure it out, paint a line around the ball maybe to see what my spin is, a little old school and new school? Any advice for someone that's maybe a little too, can't do anything unless they're sort of told what to do?
Yeah. So inside of a practice, and I've always tried to do this. I'm not saying it happens every practice, but inside of every practice, I think there's room for kids and being able to explore. And I think a lot of times with the way that we run practices, because we're trying to do it, on time, and we only had a certain amount of time or whatever, maybe we forget that that's one of the most important pieces of it. And, so it's allowing time for these guys. And obviously you're leading that as a coach, and you're saying, hey, here's what I want. Like, here's a question for you. I want you guys to think through this when we're throwing into this net, and then help them understand how to do that. Because I think you're right. Like, I think we've kind of grown into this idea where everything has to be coached and everything has to have a number on it.
Right.
And like I'm actually out working with my daughter on her volleyball serve. And, serving a volleyball isn't really that much different than throwing a ball if you think about it. Obviously they're throwing the ball up in the air. It's a much bigger ball and the whole thing, but the idea of the arm action is very similar. And, so we'll go through a couple of things, and then I stop talking, and she'll kind of regurgitate to me, or she'll say, well, I think this or this. And then I'll leave for 5 minutes, come back. Hey, what did you get? And I think that's teaching her to think for herself, or at least I hope it is.
Right.
The thing about the old school, new school. So if you think about it this way, like, people use the word analytics a lot. I hate that word. It drives me nuts, because for me, it's just information, right? And if you think of it as information, then, it makes it a little bit easier to swallow. As soon as you say analytics, you give it this power of it just being like this really strong, weird, mathematical, kind of power or whatever. I don't think you have to do that. I think for me, it's more about, it's about information. It's about objective information. And so it's taking that objective information, and then it's taking the subjective information that I have as a coach, and then being able to combine the two. Because at the end of the day, like, it's all about one thing for me. Instead of it taking us 10 times to get something right, if we can use the information, both objective and subjective, and cut it down to 5 times before we get it right, then we're doing a great job. These guys are getting better, faster. We're not having to go through all the forest through the trees type of thing to figure this thing out. So for me, it's like, it's using the information as best as we possibly can, taking the subjective. This is what I think. This is my opinion. This is my observation. This is how I've seen it for the last 27 years or whatever. And we combine those two, then you're hopefully you're cutting down trials. And if you're doing that as a coach, and if you're doing that as a player, then I would say that you're on the right track. I don't think it's anything to be scared of. There's a lot of stuff out there that I still, like, I look at, I'm like, I don't really understand that. But at the same time, like there's nothing wrong with that. It's trying to figure it out too. It's asking someone who does understand it.
Right.
And then it's, can I use it? So that same piece of information that I didn't understand, once I understand it, then I figure out, well, can I use it? And the answer to that might be no. The answer to that might be maybe sometime. Or it's like, yeah, man, this is perfect. I've never thought of it this way. Boom, here we go.
Right.
And I think if you do it that way, then, you got some good things going on for you with the old school, new school thing.
Okay. I love that answer. All right. So let's do this. I want to be respectful of Coach's time. If there's any questions, you can type them into the chat. We'll do a few things here. Look at, someone had it ready. What is my college buddy, Mark Nickerson? What is the one thing that you think high school club coaches should be doing more of with their pitchers, or one thing less, things less that they should be doing?
I think they should be listening more and talking less. I know that's going to sound snobbish, and it's not intended to at all. I just think, and again, like, every place is different, every coach is different. So when I say it, and I'll get to kind of like your original question here in just a second, but I do think there's a place for this. I think kind of what we're talking about, like, these players have become so dependent upon us, that maybe just kind of shutting up for a while and letting them figure some things out can be a really, really good thing, can be a really pure thing for these guys. And I also think too, that there are times when we're just talking to talk, and I hear it all the time. I see it. I'm guilty of it. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit to you, I'm super guilty of talking too much too. But you find like, when you can pick your spots to talk, when you can pick your spots to coach, and when you can pick your spots to, like, be quiet and let these guys kind of figure some things out. Once you guide them in a certain direction, some really good things start to happen. And, I think we look more for sort of the physical things that we can do more or less of. But to me, like, the thing that probably sticks out the most is sort of the approach that we have. It's force feeding all of this stuff into these things instead of letting them get it bit by bit. To answer your question, like on the physical side of thing, I think throwing more and pitching less, if that makes sense.
Does.
I think that's a really, especially the younger that they are. Obviously, the older they get, we want to build some skill into that too. But like to me as a coach, you're always working in two areas, right? You're working on the ability side of things and the skill side of things. The ability side of things is bigger, faster, stronger. It's long toss, it's weighted ball, it's weight room, it's, trying to get these guys stronger, more athletic, move better, blah, blah, blah. The skill side of things is pitching. It's, can I throw an 0 strike, down and away, up and in, breaking ball for a strike? And all those things are really important, but it's like, which one is the most important as a foundation? Well, for me, like the foundation has to be throwing first. And if I can get guys to a very competent level of throwing fitness and ability wise, guys are throwing the ball better and better, I think that's when it's easier to start to pitch.
I'll add something, and two things you covered is I did something in practice a couple of years back, which was, I got 18 pitchers and me. I'm the only pitching coach, right? I practice a lot of guys. So at a certain part of practice, we'd have 6 guys on the field doing PFPs, let the other coaches handle that. I stay out of the PFPs, right? I'm working in the pen with some guys, and then I got 6 guys and a couple of buckets of balls and a target pad out in the outfield. And I said, all I want you to do is just compete. I don't care if you go 3 versus 3, 2 versus 2, individual competition, come up with something or whatever. 10 minutes later, it's like the Super Bowl. They're going berserk, competing and figuring it out. And all right, let's go change up. And then I'm like, hey, 5 minutes to rotate. No, we're not leaving. And they just like you said, they just figured out how to compete and do these things. And it become a big part of practice of them sort of taking ownership over this competition and this throwing and being self-sufficient and really developing under pressure too. It's like, geez, we're doing change-up competition to hit this spot, and I got pressure and 5 other guys heckling me while I do it. Well, that could translate to a game, So I thought that was kind of within that practice, that creative time,
Yeah.
All right, here's another question.
It.
Yep. And this is a great one right here too. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to everyone's questions, but with analytics and remote recruiting these days, and it just popped off my screen. I don't know if you see it here too, Coach, but with analytics and remote recruiting these days, how can a player portray their hustle and love of the game and intuitive decisions on the field? I guess, how does a player that loves it with a high IQ stand out in the world of exit velocity and throwing velocity and all that? I mean, that's going to be a tough one, Coach.
Yeah, the remote recruiting, is obviously something that I'm not super in tune with. I mean, I know it happens. I still think that at the end of the day, the majority of these guys are still seeing, their guys play before they take them. Now that might not always be the case, but
I think it's possible he means during COVID when the dead period doesn't allow you to see them that way,
Right. And it's an awesome question. It's stuff that comes up in our game all the time, right? Like the game changes and the circumstances change all the time. And, I think that's the really, really hard part of it. But, only thing I can offer really in that question is the idea that once you're around a player, you really do understand when they have it. And, sometimes the love and the hustle is also for the same reasons, like the guy just won't stop bothering you. It's like, hey, I had certain players that wanted to come to Vanderbilt, and they kept emailing me over and over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, so you kind of get to the point where you're like, man, this guy really wants to come to Vanderbilt. And so he was relentless in his pursuit of that. And for some of those guys, it didn't matter. Like maybe they weren't good enough to play, or I didn't think they were good enough to play. Right. But he probably played somewhere, and it probably helped him along the way. It might not have helped him at Vanderbilt, but it helped him. And but I do know that being around players You know the ones who have it, and it's really hard to describe, but that's an intangible. You know, that love of the game. Like, this guy loves baseball, and you can see it, and it shows in the way he works. It shows in the way he competes. And again, it might not show right off the bat. It might not show today, but if that kid has that in his body, like if that's in his genes, to be that kind of guy, I can't believe that it's not going to help him. I can't believe that it's not going to impress someone along the way and help him some way.
I would agree with that. All right, I'm going to go with two more that are here. I'll say to anyone else, I'm certainly not as accomplished as Coach Johnson, but when he leaves, I'm certainly happy to stick around and answer some of these questions that we don't get to. So here's the two last ones, Coach. How did Trevor Bauer convince you to allow his unique training method?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we had a meeting when Trevor first came over to the Reds from the Indians. We sat down. I believe we were in Atlanta. And we sat in the bullpen, and the first thing that he and I talked about, I basically offered it to him. I said, Trev, I know that you have a lot of different unique kind of ways that you approach pitching, and you got a lot of stuff that you have going on. I said, I can tell you on my end of it, none of it spooks me. None of it's going to throw me off. I'm not going to tell you to not do any of it. You have carte blanche here to do whatever it is that you think is going to make you the very best pitcher that you can be. I will not stand in your way. If you ask my opinion on certain things and you really want my opinion, I'll give it to you. And I did. But at the same time, like, there wasn't anything that he was doing that made me like afraid. And part of that was because I had done my homework on him. And I've known Trevor for a while too. And I've known kind of what he's done, but really it was some of the same stuff that we did in college, that once you got past college, you got into pro ball, like they just didn't think was a great thing for you to do.
Great.
I mean,
yeah.
So it really wasn't all that unique to me. It was something that, at least stuff I had seen in college, or something that we have tried in college. And, we just don't see a lot of guys doing it in pro ball. So I think it was a pretty good marriage on that end. Because I think he was free to go in right away and sort of do his thing and not have to worry about, a coach looking over his shoulder and questioning every move that he made.
Okay, great. I appreciate that one. And then the last one, Coach, is what's an underrated recovery drill that people may not know about? And
I could be a little bit of a smart aleck here and say that not throwing is a great underrated recovery drill, because there is a time and a place for that. The Mark Pro, if you guys have, TENS units or Mark Pros, I think pound for pound is one of the very best modalities that you can use for recovery. Our guys use it pretty religiously. And I think it's something that you can do kind of throughout the day, whether it's right after you get done throwing, whether you get, it's the day after. But those units are really, really important for recovery. And I know not everyone has access to them, and I get that. But even, you can go to Walgreens and get sort of the generic version of those TENS units. Put them on the right spots in your elbow and your shoulder. And I still think there's a little bit of recovery there that's happening with even something like those. The Mark Pros, they're really expensive, but if you can get your hands on one, it's a really nice piece of equipment to have.
And for those of you not sure, that's basically electric stim, right? Is what we're talking about with the Mark Pro and the TENS unit. I'll add in just one thing too. I think massage and manual therapy is just absolutely tremendous. In fact, and my guys, when we first did this a few years back, looked at me pretty funny, but we have massage partners. So when we're starting to practice, man, dude, maybe you're sore from lifting, maybe you're sore from throwing, like, let's work out some of that stuff. And obviously you could do a roller and a lacrosse ball, and I'm sure you've seen it now, the massage guns that people are using, which I think are great. But
they're awesome.
I know me that, Yeah, I mean, I trained to do an Ironman not too long ago, and I was beating myself up, and I would go in and get a massage, and I felt like $1 million coming out of there. So I don't know if that's a pro thing that there's much massage happening, but from my experience, that's really a good thing to help with recovery.
You guys ever seen anyone milk their arm? I know it sounds weird, like, hey, can you milk a cat, Greg? But have you ever seen anyone milk their arm? I mean, and this is as old school gets. This was something that, you know, an old timer told me, like, literally when I was a kid, but it really does work. After you get done pitching, you hold your hand, you know, like a shower is a good way of doing it. You blast hot water on your shoulder. But then it's just taking and it's working the blood down into your shoulder. And it's called milking your arm. And you keep doing that over and over and over and over and over again. And it seems weird and it looks weird and all that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you, if you do it the right way and you do it hard enough, long enough, it's a massage for your arm, essentially.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Tom Brady's brought to light a lot of the modalities and ways that we can train. That isn't just going in and crushing yourself in the weight room to be in shape. And certainly a quarterback and a pitcher definitely have some traits, you know, that are in common. But Coach, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I know with your schedule and trying to be downtime in the, you know, in the off season with your family and how busy you're going to be during the season, just to join me is really fantastic. And we're already getting some thank yous in there from other people. So I really do appreciate it. When you sign off, I'll just stick around and go through some of these questions. It may not be as good as, you know, your answers, but at least I'll try to give people some answers. So Coach,
well,
thanks
listen,
so much.
I got a couple more minutes. If you
right.
want to hang around a little longer, that's fine.
right.
I got no issue with that.
All right. That's great. I appreciate that. So, all right, I'm going to just go through this. So if you walk by a field or walking around an indoor facility where players are doing drills that would for sure not help them in the sport, or just being told to do things the wrong way mechanically, would you step in? Is it okay to step in? I have seen some very questionable things from coaches.
It's a tricky one. I'll tell you, well, here's the first place that I think of, or the first place I go to when I hear something like that. You know, it's so in minor league spring training, you have 110 pitchers that are moving around from field to field. You have all of the coaches that are there for every level, whether that's A ball, rookie ball, all the way up to AAA. And you're going to hear a lot of things that, you know, in your mind, like, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't make sense. You know, as a matter of fact, it might be some things that you really don't think it's right. But, you know, certainly there's this part too, where you don't want to just go in and say, oh, no, that's wrong. You're wrong. You know, this is the right way of thinking about it or whatever. And people have their reasonings. And what I found when I was coordinator with the Cubs is that if you can get down to why they think the way they think, it may not align with the way that you do, but you know, there could be some ways that they're thinking of it that can help you. There's certain things that you may fundamentally disagree with completely, and that's just the way it is. But I think really it's giving everyone their due and trying to understand as best as you can as to why they're doing it. And, you know, then you can agree and disagree, and then you can kind of have that conversation as you go. But I think if nothing else, seeing it to see it, maybe not fully understanding the scope as to why, because listen, I'm as opinionated as anyone, you know, and I think in order to do this job, you have to have an opinion. But I have learned over the years too that everyone will differ a little bit. Sometimes it can help you, sometimes it can't, but you got to at least give it its due and it's kind of run its course in order to understand it better. So I'd say, if nothing else, at least find out more before you just say, hey, it's flat wrong, man. You know, because they may be coming from an angle that you haven't thought of.
Okay, I like that. Here's what I'm curious to see. It says, what do you see happening to a lefty specialist?
They're going away for sure because of the 3-batter rule. And, you know, I think now what's happening is they may get that one lefty in the middle.
Yeah, I assume so.
You know, they might get the one lefty in the middle of the lineup. But now with the 3-batter rule, you're getting 2 right-handers and a lefty. If you're really, really lucky, you're getting the 2 lefties and a righty. So I think it's going away. I think now the idea the lefties have to do a little bit better job against right-handed hitting. It's going to be, and it has become way more important for them to be equipped to get a righties out, because they're just going to face more righties. The guys sitting on the bench, they're going to pinch hit for that lefty unless he's one of their dudes. So you're going to get more righties involved in that situation. So you got to be able to pitch against them.
Yeah. Okay. For the younger ones, just starting out at 9U, what do you think is a good drill to build accuracy without straining or doing the wrong thing, which can cause injury, because the younger ones try and throw harder than accurate?
Yeah. So we play a spot game, and I think this is appropriate for really any level. Here's my glove. I'm going to put it from shoulder to shoulder. I might put it at my chest. I might put it on my left shoulder, my right shoulder. And we're going to play a game with the group on how many times we can hit that, per group. If I want to take it another step, I'm going to put, you guys ever see those little orange stickers? You can get them at Walmart. You can get them anywhere. My wife uses them when she does garage sales. She'll put 32 cents on something that I have had forever, and she doesn't care about. So I can put that inside of there, and that gives me something else to look at just besides a glove. But just in terms of command is it's sort of set up the way that you want it set up. I mean, how important is the mitt? And what are we trying to do when we're practicing it? So when we're playing catch, that spot game within the spot, those are things that you can do to improve command. In the bullpen, are we counting the times that they hit their spots? Are we counting the times are we competing against someone maybe that's in the bullpen as well? But if it's really important to you, then you'll count it. If it's really important to you, then you'll find ways of measuring it. And I think, just like with anything else in baseball, it's pretty easy just to play catch and not worry so much about that spot game. It's really easy to get in the bullpen and say, hey, let's work on all of our pitches. It's a whole other environment when now all of a sudden we've put something added to it, some sort of competitiveness, some sort of competition, some sort of measurement along with it. So I just tell you, even at 9 years old, figure out ways to measure that and figure out ways for those guys to compete with it.
I love that. All right, I'm going to make this the last one, but this one's also interesting too. Is what are you typically saying on a mound visit? What's happening on a mound visit? What's your is it guy by guy, or this would be a fun one for a bunch of pitching coaches to talk about.
Yeah, it's a little bit guy by guy, but the one thing that you have to remember when you go out to the mound is you're only searching for one thing, and that's an out. Not 2 or 3, you're searching for 1 out. And that's the way that I approach it. So when I go out there, first off, I don't like going out. I never really have. But when I go out, it's with the intention of getting it out. So it is going to be a little bit individual. A lot of times it's a break, and I'll tell them that too. It's like, hey man, just out here to give you a little bit of a breather. Here's who we have coming up. Here's what we talked about in the meeting. This is what you've done with him the first couple of times up. That's whether or not that's hey, we're going to pitch around this dude, or this is the way we're going to attack him. I just want to know, what do you feel comfortable leading with? So what's the first pitch that we're going to throw him? What are we going to lead with right here? And then try to give him, something on the scouting report. It's never, ever about delivery. The one thing that I'll talk about is, just making sure that we're focused for these next few pitches. It's like, hey, listen, man, we're 1 pitch away right here. If we're focused, if we do our thing and we execute, we're out. And that's it. So it's really kind of matter of fact. And it will be guy by guy. Sometimes I know that the guy out there is mad, so I don't want him out there throwing hate balls, and I'll tell him, I'm like, hey man, you're out here throwing hate balls, and it ain't gonna help you get this guy out. So let's move past that. Let's get unmad, and let's figure out a way to execute this pitch. It may be that I know a guy has trouble focusing. He's all over the place. It's like, hey, let's have one thought right here. Make sure we focus on the mitt. Make sure that we're executing right here on this pitch, and then we go to the next pitch. Let's not think too far ahead. So really, it's how I know the guy, and what I think I can say to help him get to a good spot to throw the pitch, and really that's it. There are other times when I'm out there just basically saying, hey man, just hang in there. We got help on the way. Here's the last hitter. This is what we got to do with him.
Yeah,
but it's always about getting an out, and I think that's the way you got to look at it. Like, look at it like, when I walk away from this, when I walk back to the dugout, my whole goal is getting an out.
I like that. I think that mound visits can really work when they really do just give a break. It is that timeout. It's 3 hits in a row. It's like, let's slow the momentum down, just calm things down. It can seem to help. And you're right. I think depending, you may not find this as much at your level, but sometimes it'll be a guy that just lost the zone, and you're out there basically trying to get him to think about getting the person out, rather than you could see the brain spinning on the delivery. And we've all been out there when we're thinking about our delivery, and it's a bad place to be.
Yeah, I just want to reaffirm. I want to reaffirm that he's really good, and he's got enough to get the guy out.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for your time, Coach. I really appreciate it. Sticking around. Guys, you have my email address. You could reach out with any questions that we couldn't answer, and if it's something that important, I could send it along to Coach. But he's obviously got other priorities. But Coach, thanks again so much for your time. Have a great New Year. Good luck. Hope your family stays safe, and good luck to the Reds this coming season.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, it's nice to hang out. Take care now.
See ya.
All right, bye. Everybody, thank you if you're still on. If you're signing off, thank you for joining us. Sorry if I didn't get to your question, and I will send this out tomorrow after the video gets loaded onto Zoom, and I'll send it out to everyone's email tomorrow. But thank you for joining me, and everybody stay safe, and let's keep on playing the sport we love. Thank you, everyone. Billy, I'll answer your question that you sent. I'll answer that when you and I talk. I saw yours. I didn't ask him because I didn't think he's involved in the college game at this point for recruiting.